Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Back through popular demand and an influx of your submitted listener questions, today James and I are going to sit down and tackle some rut-specific questions, heading into what is set to be an adrenaline-filled couple of months in the Australian bush. We've tried to do this a little bit earlier in the year to get people thinking ahead to March and April. Whether it's fallow bucks or red stags, pre-rut, during the rut, or post-rut, many of these lessons can be translated to your hunting. If you have a question following this podcast, please email us at info@twinelements.com.au. Please use the subject line FAQ so we can process those, or simply send either James, myself, or Twin Elements a message on Instagram through our DMs, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Without further ado, we'll jump into the podcast. Are you in the market for serious boots for all feet, terrain and adventures? Well, look no further than Lower Boots. We have been running the Lower GTX3s for many years now. I've lost count of how many years and adventures we've had these boots without so much as a blister. They are flexible enough while still being supportive. I run them across multiple land types, whether it's in the Northern Territory floodplains, the mountains of Montana, or the basalt wall country in North Queensland, Australia. The team at Lower have extended their generosity to you, our valued listeners, and supplied us with a unique discount code. Head to their website and let them know we sent you. Use code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout for 10% off your next order. If you're like me and enjoy trying things before you buy, then head in store to Venture Hunting. They have their Springwood Megastore as well as their smaller store in Hamilton, Victoria. Enjoy the benefits of trying before you buy and get the perfect fit. Wear Lowers on your next hunt. Your feet will thank you for it. Now, before we read today's first FAQ, we're going to play you all an awesome little bit of a voice memo that got sent into the Twin Elements DMs recently. This right here is sort of why James and I do the podcast. It's for all of these little interactions that we get to have with you guys, our valued listeners. So Nathan at Outdoor Nape on Instagram has been a listener to the podcast since day one. And recently he managed his first fallow deer spiker with the bow. And this is what he had to say here. We'll play the audio message.
Legend, I want to say a massive thanks to you because I just got a fallow spike just this morning, and I have to credit it to you guys, you and James, your podcast, and also a couple conversations we had maybe like earlier last year. But there was one particular thing I was talking to you about, and you said about the lustfulness, and it really stuck in my head just because like it's a biblical term like lust. And how this played out this morning was a really long stalk. It took about an hour, and I buggered it in the last, I wanted to get well under 40, and when I got there, I buggered it, and the deer kind of knew something was up and started working its way up, and I just stopped, and I remembered what you said about, like, not making it happen. Like, don't get caught up in the lustful, like, those desires, and just, it's bow hunting, like, that happens. And so I literally stopped, and I was like, don't be lustful, like, just let it go, it's all good. And then that just popped in my head. I was like, oh, lustful, it's a young spiker, he might be lustful. And I just went, bleep, 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 and he ran straight back in, and then came to 28 yards, and then I pumped him. So, like, I literally had, like, come to terms with it being done. I was like, yep, cool, that's right, don't be lustful, let it go. And then as he's walking up the hill, I'm like, he might be lustful. And I just, give him those doe bleeps, and then he comes running in, and it just worked out. And it's just, it was such a good stalk, such a good hunt. And, like, listening to your guys' podcast, it's, like, helped me to get better and better every time at bow hunting. And like I've shot a few deer now with the bow, but this one I feel like I just put all the things, like did all the 1%ers like you guys say, and it just worked out. Like I'm so chuffed and I'm super grateful. Like I listen to your guys' podcast like daily. I go back and re-listen to all the episodes. So keep it up, man. Like really appreciate your stuff.
How good is that? Absolutely love that little message. I listened to it a couple of times, I must be honest, and just the enthusiasm there is truly infectious. So congratulations, Nathan. Awesome job, mate. And thank you very much for the feedback. Again, we really appreciate you sending that in. It's made my day. In addition to Nathan's voice message, he's also submitted another FAQ to get us underway here today on the FAQ podcast. During the fallow rut, are there ever circumstances that you would call to a mature buck? Is calling to a mature buck only going to work on the right day with the right stage of the rut hormones, or would you guys personally just hunt that buck silently? Conversely, if hunting young bucks, do you find calling would affect the ability to call them in later years due to making them wise to a call, similar to foxes? So great question there. A number of things to answer firstly, but similar to what you said in the question, I find that calling to a mature buck is a lot more difficult than a younger buck. Commonly, this is probably the case because they are the ones that seem to have the does. As we said in one of our first ever Twin Elements podcasts when we were talking about fallow deer biology, a mature buck is an animal that's going to set up a scrape and he's going to be very territorial over that scrape. And in fallow deer physiology and rut biology, I guess, the females are actually the ones that go to the buck. So even if you're sitting there out in the bush and you're making the absolute best doe calls, if that buck's sitting on his scrape and he has 10 to 15 does and enough that he thinks, yep, this is a good amount of does for me, he's not going to want to leave that scrape, especially when there's competition around, potentially leave those 15 does to go and get one doe that's out in the bush, no matter how good you sort of sound. And the same goes for that buck. Like he might hear someone rattling antlers and making sort of fighting sounds, around his scrape. But if he's already got a heap of satellites and does with him, it's kind of like, why leave those animals where he's in his vicinity on his scrape that he spent a bit of time building to go and find, these unknown animals that are making noises. So it definitely comes back to me for just really understanding deer behavior, being able to understand the circumstances that are unfolding. So where I do find that there's great circumstances to call to a mature buck is actually when a lot of the time I move in silently, say it's on first light, and I'm patterning a buck and I know that he's on a particular scrape on a certain ridge and I can get in there to say 100, 200 yards undetected, sort of at first light, using the, cloak of darkness to allow me to get in undetected. Once I get to about 200, make sure the wind's right. I then wait for enough light to be able to see the does that he has with him. From there, I'm basically treating this as a spot and stalk bow hunt. It's probably, a touch easier in terms of distance with a rifle. Like if you can get to 100 for a lot of guys, that makes for an ethical shot. But I'm basically treating that as a spot and stalk where the calling of that animal is basically just giving me a constant location, ding or notification as to where he is and where he's at. And most of the time, as we said earlier, for fallow bucks, that's on the scrape. So I'll basically, as a bow hunter, try and get as close to that action and that nucleus of activity on the scrape as possible. And I'll be using, my biggest priority is trying to avoid the eyes, ears, noses of all those does, which might not actually be on the scrape itself, but within close proximity. I'm going to assume that the biggest buck is normally on the scrape in the middle of those does. And then the younger bucks, or the satellite bucks, tend to be orbiting that sort of nucleus and trying to get in and close to the does. And as a bow hunter, for me, the more animals there is, it definitely makes it harder, but it can add to a little bit of confusion and excitement and all these things that you can play on later on. So for me, again, long-winded answer, what I'll try and do is get as close as possible. And if I notice that, the mature buck that I'm trying to take chases, a young spiker or a young buck off the scrape, and he pops over a ridge and he's sort of between me and where he left his does, that might be an opportunity for me if I think he's lost one of those does, or if he's chasing bucks trying to get, them out of the range of where he thinks the doe might be. If you simply let out a few like meow, 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 he might think that there's now a doe that is unaccounted for in the vicinity of those satellite or rival bucks, and that might urge him to come over because he's already off his scrape, round her up, and then take her back to the scrape on his way back. Again, I might do a couple, read his behavior. If he's not interested, then I'll shut right up, because the last thing I want to do is be trying to call to that mature buck and then have young satellites coming in. And if they're not the caliber of animals that I want to take, or if I've got meat in the freezer, it can make it harder, because those young bucks are generally going to come right into where you've called from to within 20 yards most of the time, and then they're going to often circle downwind. And if you get enough animals sort of erupting out of there, you might get away with one young buck. But if does that are spread out start watching all these other animals get a bit spooked and sort of wary to something going on in this ridge, then that's where I think educating young bucks can come into play. Like if every year you go to the same scrape and you start calling to bucks, or if you start rattling, the common one that I've seen is when people over rattle, and they do it, especially when they're rattling a heap. The bucks aren't quite ruddy. It's maybe just pre-rut, and they've still got a little bit of senses to them. And you rattle, and a lot of people get impatient, and they sort of want to move too quick. And you've done this really good rattling sequence. You haven't given enough time. And then right as you probably should be sitting there, with everything pre-range, waiting for an animal to come in, you start packing up, and that young buck comes in to say 20, 30, 40, 50 meters, whatever it may be, and they wind you, or they see you packing up. And every time now that they hear rattles, they're going to start associating that as this unknown, figure, person, hunter on a scrape. And if you do that enough, these animals, especially the mature animals, if they've been called to, hundreds of times, tens of times, that's all it takes. And especially when, does, I think, are involved, it's probably less of a, consideration for me as to educating young bucks. But if you're educating the does as to yourself being in the area over the rut, that's when you find that they change their habits, and rather than just feeding and going up a little gully and close to these scrapes, if they move, even if it's a kilometre, then the bucks might not have actually set up scrapes in that area. And that's where they sort of, I guess, the bucks, you might find a mature buck might lock down his does and just be in the most thickest, gnarliest bush. And even then, with a bow, rifle, whatever your weapon of choice may be, getting a clear shot in there, even if they're calling, can be near impossible. So we try and, I guess, to summarize, keep things as quiet on our end as possible, especially with mature bucks during the peak rut, just because we're trying to more use their behavior, their movement, their vocalizations to get in and basically hunt them without any other animals knowing that we're there. The second we start calling is the second that things can change, animals can get a little bit educated, and often it actually complicates the situation. That's, obviously to be said, where if you pre-rut and you're just targeting any, male of the species, a doe call here and there, especially when there are young, frustrated bucks on the periphery looking for a female, a doe call there is going to be super effective, but it's not that mature class of buck most commonly. So thank you very much, Nathan. Love the voice message, and hopefully that answers that question for you.
When you're out hunting, your camouflage needs to blend in or cost you opportunities. That's why I run Numa camouflage clothing. Built for hunters who push hard, Numa is quiet, durable, and designed to disappear in everything from open tussock to thick mountain terrain. Whether you're heading out on a multi-day hunt, glassing big country, or slogging it out in the rain, Numa keeps you dry, comfortable, and helps you push further. So if you're gearing up for your next adventure, check out the full range at Venture Hunting and Outdoors and level up your hunting kit with Numa. Built for the outdoors, built for the hunt. So the next listener question comes in from Toby Roberts. In regards to your FAQ post, here's a bit of a question for you guys. If you need any more information on my situation, just hit me up. I've been hunting a large property in southwest Victoria. I'm not going to say the exact location. For a few years now with a healthy fallow deer population. Leading into the rut, finding bachelor mobs and groups of does isn't an issue. The property has multiple gully systems and plenty of bush, and I'm always finding fresh sign and scrapes just before the expected rut period. However, once the rut actually kicks off and I'm hunting there, it's like the deer completely disappear. Some mornings or afternoons I might see a solitary doe, but that's about it. Then once the rut finishes, they all seem to move back into the area again. I've had successful hunts in the pre and post rut periods, but I'd really like to get amongst it and experience more of the chaos and behaviour of the rut itself. What might be causing this, and how can I improve my chances during the peak rut? Well, mate, as someone who's actually hunted in that area a few years ago now, there is definitely a few fallow kicking about, and I can confidently say that you're probably just in a bit of a unlucky situation here where, as you've obviously figured out for some reason, which known to behold to me, there are periods and places where the fallow deer just move off during the rut, and by the sound of it, your place is one. So my advice actually to you, until the population starts getting bigger in these situations, and I think that population down there probably is a growing population. Until the population gets bigger and really spreads out, and they actually come and just stick around on your place all year, my advice to you, if you want to get amongst the rutting action, there's probably not much more you can do on your place. It would actually be going and trying to find some neighbouring places or even further afield where they are going to be rutting, because fallow deer can move easily, a couple of Ks, 5, even more Ks away to go and rut. It's seen fairly commonly, and equally they obviously then do that return, almost migratory return back to where they're not rutting. And people get fallow deer, and especially red deer as well. Like red deer can travel extremely large distances, where there are not plenty of places there, but there are certain places that I've got good friends where, they won't see a red deer any time outside of March and into April. And then, come the rest of the time, there's absolutely not a sign of red deer, but, 50 rock up on a particular place for the rut. So yeah, if you're not seeing, it's interesting here saying that you're seeing, always seeing fresh sign and scrapes just before the expected rutting period. So if you want to get amongst the rutting action, if you are actually finding scrapes and it's just say in that middle of March area on that place, like if you think getting new access or whatever is going to be quite difficult, what I would probably try and do is maybe do some like early rattling and just see if you can rattle in some bucks there. I don't expect they're probably going to be croaking, but yeah, that's probably going to be the closest thing that you're sadly going to get to rutting on that place. As I said earlier, if the numbers of fallow deer in the area keep growing, sometimes these pockets can fill out and you get overflow where you get actual deer from other places that might come and rut on your place. And then and then you might notice that different bucks rock up post-rut or pre-rut or whatever to when they're actually rutting on the place. But sadly, there's not much you can do. I've had people try with lip blocks and all the rest of it. And yeah, nothing really seems to work. It's just one of these phenomenons that I wish I could explain and understand better. But sadly, yeah, can't. So in summary, it'd be trying to find another place to hunt during the rut, which may necessarily not be that far away, or waiting for the population to grow and hoping that the area fills in with numbers, and also doing some pre-rut rattling. But thank you very much, Toby, for sending in that question, mate, and best of luck down in that part of the world. It is a beautiful area, and hopefully you get onto a few bucks.
Our next question has been sent in by Callum McCall, and he says, "Hi Ayden, I have an FAQ. Should I practice shooting with my broadheads I'm going to hunt with, or should I shoot field points that are the same weight? I'm using the Cayuga Old School double bevel, and the field points I have are ballistic match the old school broadheads. Love the podcast. Thanks for sharing yours and James's knowledge and breaking the information down. Good luck in America hunting elk." So thank you very much, Callum. We initially answered this question to Callum prior to our America trip, so we did get the information over to him, and now we're just moving it to a specific time, just with people obviously preparing for the rut. We thought this was a relevant question in terms of getting everyone's bow and archery gear ready for the next couple of months of action. So to answer that question, I always, and I want to say that with a lot of emphasis, shoot my bow and sight it in with broadheads once I then ideally have the bow tuned, all these things taken into account, and my broadheads are hitting the target, the dot that I want to shoot, say an inch dot at 10 meters all the way through to 60 meters with broadheads, each arrow perfectly set up the same, consistently being able to shoot with broadheads into the dot. That's when I'll then go to, field points. And even then, what I'll often do at the start of my shooting or the start of a couple of reps is I'll shoot a broadhead first into the target, go, yep, bullseye, cool. And then the next second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever shots you want to take in that little series of shots at, say, 30 meters, I'll shoot with field points. And the reason I do the broadhead first is, one, just to shoot, and I try and treat my practice shooting as even if I've got 5 arrows in the quiver and I intend to shoot them at 30, the first one is the one that counts. That's my bull elk in this example, where, he's at 30 meters, he's just walked out from a tree, I'm at full draw, I've got one shot to make this count, I've got to hit the bullseye. And I try and make my training as realistic as that as possible. And then the second, third, fourth shots are more just me getting reps, feeling good. If I stuffed up the first shot, going, I did that with my grip, or I didn't level the bow out properly. And that's where I use field points. One, just for the longevity of the target, but two, so that, when I'm shooting really, really well, and say I'm shooting 30 meters, I can put 4 or 5 arrows in, a little grouping the size of a tennis ball. And when you're doing that with shaving sharp broadheads or broadheads with bleeders or whatever, you're very quickly going to, one, ruin fletchers, two, ruin your target, all these sorts of things. So all that to say, basically, I go through, I get, if it's a dozen arrows, a dozen broadheads, make sure they're all spinning well, check everything. I have an arrow labeled 1 to 12. I'll go and shoot that arrow once, twice, 3, 4 times, making sure that it's perfectly tuned, coming out of the bow, flying really nicely from, 10 meters all the way out to 60 meters. Once I'm happy with that, I'll basically put them away, make sure that I'm consistently shooting that broadhead first time out of the bow, perfect, and then I'll basically shoot a series of field points after that. If I then go to a place where I'm not on a private property where I'm able to shoot long range and have to go to like a bow club or something, I'm always shooting field points, but at least in the back of my head, I know that they're all tuned to my bow. And that's where, obviously, if you've got a big trip coming up, I hear a lot of people saying, my field points and broadheads aren't shooting in the same spot. Then that tells you straight away that your bow's not tuned. So that's where, whether it's going down to venture hunting and seeing Dustin and some of the guys in the bow shop there, or going to guys like Brad Murphy, Ian Summers, there's plenty out there of really, really knowledgeable guys that are really good at tuning bows and getting them all dialed. That's what you might have to do if you're not capable of doing it yourself. And I do not claim to be a gear nut. I basically have 2 blade broadheads from Cayuga Broadheads, just easy to sharpen, easy to tune, easy to shoot them with my day 6 shafts. And I basically took all that into venture hunting, got that set up with my bow, put it through paper, was shooting, arrow and broadhead together at 20 meters, and then just went out from there. And ever since then, it's just been perfect. So the second I notice that my broadheads and field points aren't shooting the same, I'll go and get my bow probably restrung, retuned, do all those things. And that's just what you've got to do to ensure that you're accurate when you're target practicing, and then that translates to effective hunting. So thank you very much, Callum, for sending that through. Now is a really, really good time for everyone to be making sure either your projectiles, bow, arrows, whatever it may be, rifles are shooting absolutely perfect and dialed in, heading into what is going to be one of the best times of year here in Australia.
So the next question comes in from Ben Hansen. Hey guys, I love your podcast and have learnt so much about the rut and hunting. I'm writing in regards to what are the first signs that your shot has been successful, e.g. head placement of the animal after being hit, body movements, etc. I'm writing because I took a shot at a fallow buck from 100 meters with a rifle. I ranged the target and waited for him to get in a clear view. He was front on, and being the first buck I had seen, I got excited and rushed it. I took the shot, it felt good, but his body movements didn't really indicate anything. I took the shot and he lowered his head and stood there for a couple of seconds and ran. There was no blood trail or any other indications of a successful shot. Can you guys let me know what a good hit indication looks like when and how they move? Regards, Ben. P.S. Keep up the podcast. We love it. Thanks, Benny. So by the sounds of that, mate, I'm going to say, just from, my outwards observation, I'm going to say you obviously probably missed that one purely just because when emotion's running high, especially if it's, you might see that big buck or it's the first deer or whatever, your first animal, you get excited and the systems that you put in place previously, and you probably, just rushed that shot a little bit. But to actually answer your question, so when it comes to, I'm probably a bit bad on this one in the sense that my bow at the moment, I've had a really great start to the year, which will be next week's podcast, where I've shot, I think 4 foxes now, a doe, a massive goat, and a velvet buck. And for most of them, I couldn't tell you. I could tell you that I'd hit them, but I couldn't tell you where I'd hit them because my bow, this new Hoyt that we've got at 80 pound, is actually pumping out the arrows. And most of the time, I'm shooting them at pretty close range. And so, because I'm shooting a hinge, I sort of not flinch, but close my eyes when I shoot them. But I couldn't tell you exactly where, but I can always tell that I have hit them. And the reason why is they normally sort of buckle. So especially with a rifle, like if you shoot something with a rifle, you almost see like that fluid wave or that movement, that shock wave go through them. And so that's the first thing that I normally use if I see the shot, especially with a rifle, or even with a bow. The second indication that is just the sound of it. So normally people describe it and like it's something that you get very familiar with after you've, hopefully got a few critters, Benny, but it's the sound of like the thud. So, there's like if you hear I'll go back a little bit to bow and arrow as well. If you hear the arrow like hit bone, you hear this almighty crack. If you generally get something in the guts, it's quite a dull sort of thud. Whereas and then if you shoot something through the chest cavity, you almost hear the air like just sort of leave there. But every sort of zone, I guess, really has a sort of sound, and you can't. It's almost like when you put something through the chest cavity, it's almost like the arrow sort of rattles through the ribs. Like you sort of hear that. And so, hearing it is really important, I guess. And yes, same with a bullet. Like with a bullet, you'll hear, not necessarily like this to the same detail because it's a bit further away, but you will hear that thud. You hear the, and then like you hear the bullet projectile actually hit. So that's one thing. Obviously, if you're doing like super long range shooting and stuff, where you're shooting something at like 800 yards, it's probably not going to happen. But even then, like at that stage, I'm assuming you've got a spotting scope or something set up, and then you can actually, it's probably not a bad thing to watch, but you can actually see the fluid wave like run through an animal. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. Also, normally from my experience, like when animals get hit, they're not like they know they've been hit. You know what I mean? Like imagine someone coming up to you and hitting you with a sledgehammer, right? You're not going to sit there and like, unless you've been hit in the head, if you've been hit in the chest, you're like, the first thing, your fight or flight's kicking in and you're sprinting away. You're not sitting there and like analyzing the situation and be like, oh, what actually like, what was that? Especially, like if you've got an arrow raked up your ribs or, like if someone, shoots you with a bullet through the chest, you're like flat out at a sprint. So I think an animal's mannerisms as well after the shot also, can indicate. That's not always the sense. I've certainly had things that you've shot them and they're like, look around, especially if you've like called them in or, it's the rut or it's a boar or something like that, where it's like there's a rutting activity and they're not really sure what's happened. And they're really caught up in the moment and you shoot them. But for the most part, like if you hit, like shoot something, they're not going to be sort of standing there and analyzing the situation. So yeah, in summary, mate, I would, listening for the sound really helps indicate if you've had a shot. It doesn't necessarily indicate if your shot's successful. It's more just if you've hit them. If you're a bow hunter, you can really learn and get familiar with what type of sound indicates sort of what type of hit. And then, thirdly, sort of how they act after the shot. Like if they just sprint off, you may be more inclined, even if you didn't hear it, you may be like, okay, maybe I did actually hit them. And then, obviously going and looking for blood and following up on that would be the next sort of step in the saga. But hopefully that helps, mate. Just remain. Ayden did a really good. Got a lot of feedback about buck fever. Can't remember what number podcast it was, but hopefully you listen to it and go back, freshen up if you haven't, and best of luck out there for the rut, mate. Hopefully you can get amongst a few more fallow deer.
We are proud to introduce Carnivore Collective, supplying some of the best meat processing gear in Australia. If you're a complete hunter who loves the benefit of being responsible for harvesting your own meat, then listen up. Take control of the whole field to freezer process with gear from Carnivore Collective. The team have absolutely everything you need. We've been running their number 32 mincer, and honestly, it's a beast. That's it. That's all you need to know. This thing chews through venison, pork, and whatever wild game meat I throw at it. It's the best mincer I've ever used, churning out over 70 kilograms of meat into mince in less than 30 minutes. But the number 32 mincer is just a start. Carnivore Collective also has saws, vacuum sealers, dehydrators, sausage fillers, jerky gear, sausage spice mixers, seasoned rubs, and more. Literally the full end-to-end range for anyone serious about producing high-quality wild game meats at home. And the best part? Carnivore Collective has set up an exclusive offer for you, our listeners. Simply use code TWIN10 at checkout for 10% off your order. If you want to check out their range in person, then Venture Hunting is now stocking Carnivore Collective products in store and online. Alrighty, our next question has been sent in by Stuart Anderson. This was actually an email, which is greatly appreciated. So, hi team, loving all of your content. Quick one. I've found a little gully where red deer move through, down low, and the thermals are all over the place, quite a tight area. If I was to sit around 60 metres away from a game trail in a temporary little hide behind some sort of a tarp or camouflage, hoping that when the thermals blow down towards the game trail, do you think that my scent might be kept within my little hide? Hoping this makes sense, though if I'm hiding in my little tent-like structure, it may reduce my scent from drifting deeper towards the game trail. Appreciate your thoughts, gentlemen, on this one. Regards, Stuart Anderson. So, great little question there. Obviously, this is quite specific to Stuart's hunting environment, but it also does raise a few questions for people, because I get a lot of people, even if they're a little bit older and potentially less able to move long distances in the hills, saying like, what are your thoughts on tree stand hunting or blind hunting? And they definitely have their place, especially if you can pattern animals. It's probably easier on smaller properties where you don't want to go in and just, scent up the area by putting boots to the ground. And it can be really effective if you've got, say a mob of does coming in and a buck on one scrape, being able to set up a blind or a bit of cover nearby and just sit there and rely on patience and basically knowing that those animals are likely to come through an area. And in Stuart's question for this example with the red deer, I think it's definitely worth trying. Again, it's probably not the strategy that I would go to, in all honesty, just because I like personally being able to move and read the situation as it comes to me rather than sort of be a bit of a victim of the scenario that's put before me, if that makes sense. So the way I'll try and explain that is that I would be mindful of a couple of factors if I was to try that. So the obvious pros or good things about this blind is that, it might quite possibly have a bit more wind concealment if you're within a bit of a structure rather than if you're just sitting on the landscape and the wind's able to blow over you quite easily. But I also don't think it's going to have the exact effect that, you think it's going to have. I think personally setting up a blind and taking a tarp in there and trying to move branches and do all that type of stuff is probably going to be more of a hindrance and, elaborate idea than just going in there quietly and trying to read the thermals. And if the thermals are pretty crappy, try and back out of there, especially when you consider some of the cons or the negative aspects of trying to set up a blind. So as I was sort of alluding to when I first said why I probably wouldn't be as keen on this, is that I just think sitting in a blind and being contained to that blind means that you've really got limited movement and ability to move if that animal walks by out of range. So say you can only shoot 30 meters and that's what you've set yourself out. If that animal walks by at 40 and stops and feeds for 10 minutes, it's out of range and you could have moved, say, one step every 10 seconds and been able to take that animal at 30 meters by moving a little bit closer. And that's just an ability that you're going to have if you're not confined to, a permanent structure such as the blind. Again, coming back to the blind and depending on how you're going to set it out, I just think that's going to provide like limited shot angles and restrict, the ability for you to potentially shoot him if he walks through, like if he's in a tight little dark gully or a stag or hinds coming down a tight little gully, there's already enough natural barriers in the terms of branches, trees, limbs, all these different things. So then you being sitting within a blind, say he does walk within 30 meters, and then you're sitting there going, oh, it's not in my window, but he's within range. That would just infuriate me, I think. So I think whilst the idea of, being in that hotspot and trying to be, because obviously this is all hypothetical. Like if the wind's bad and they're smelling you, they're not going to come within range. So I do appreciate the fact that, you're thinking about wind concealment, and that's where, for me, I'd potentially even look into a tree stand or some sort of tree saddle. Just simply getting up higher might allow you to get more shots purely because you might have an improved angle. And two, it actually might, again, it doesn't solve the ability of being able to move or anything like that. But that would probably be my recommendation, other than the fact that personally, I would probably just try and play the wind and only hunt it when the prevailing wind direction and the thermals are matching the direction that you want to hunt. So for example, if you can only hunt this particular little gully on a southeasterly, every time it's a southeasterly, I'd be trying to go there and hunt it. And then I'd also be very cautious of the thermals. So first thing in the morning, the wind's going to want to suck downhill or towards water or any of those colder areas where the sun's not hitting. And then as soon as it gets to mid-morning, if the animals are walking back in that gully, the thermals should want to suck, uphill and then also still play to those prevailing wind directions. So just knowing those sort of little traits and quirks of the wind and thermals is going to be your biggest battle. But, I think going back to deer biology and trying to understand the animals and why they might like one of these little smaller gullies is that they're pretty smart creatures. To be honest, a lot of the time when they're going back into these smaller little gullies, where the wind is pretty shitty and the thermals switch and the wind direction, doesn't seem to want to blow a consistent direction, is probably actually why those animals are in there. Like it constantly informs them that, there's something going on, coming in to where they consider themselves safe. So it's one of those things, if you can maybe try and hunt them out of that gully as they come out, late afternoon or as they feed back early morning, then that could be potentially one of the keys to success for you here. But thank you very much for sending that through, Stuart. Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys, our listeners. But it is a bit of a tricky situation. I personally would just, I think, prefer my ability to be able to move slightly. Even if when I say move, it's not like just run through there, but it's like I might take one step, wait 5 minutes, take one step, wait 5 minutes, see that deer is coming into range and be able to move 3 steps to a new game trail and then watch that deer move through. Whereas if I was stuck in the blind, I might not have that ability. And again, with reduced shot angles, reduced movement and ability, say that the wind is good, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get that animal if you can't, do those things. So thank you very much. And we'll get to the next question.
So this next question came in from Colin Gare. I hope I said that right, mate. But g'day, guys. First off, awesome stuff on the podcast recently on fallow and reds. A few things clicked for me listening to that one, especially with stuff I'd seen out and about on my access. Quick question. How do you lads feel about the weather system currently on the East Coast will affect the rut in the New England, especially if it will at all? Will the wet weather change the buck's timing and or behaviour? Cheers, Colin. So I'm not sure when this one got sent in. We are currently having a heat wave on the East Coast, where we are at the moment. So I'm just going to answer this question in general about weather systems and fallow deer in the rut, and also reds. So if it's a weather system and it's a low, generally speaking, it actually makes it better for fallow, I find, because they're going around freshening up their scrapes, especially like afterwards and stuff like that. And yeah, obviously the cooler weather can get them really fired up, especially that sort of like drizzly sort of rain. When it's just like pelting down, it makes it pretty hard because obviously the rut is a very audible sort of hunting style where you're listening for croaks and roars and stuff like that. And so really heavy rain continuously can sort of shut that down and make it quite hard. But if you do find something, obviously then it can be a little bit easier to get in. If there's a shitload of rain, trying to get in and hunt reds, sometimes it can be the most majestic thing in the world. But generally from my experience, I've found that, rain and wind mean that the red deer shut down pretty well. Even during the rut, they'll go and find some pretty thick timber and just sit in there, which then you can't really hear their roars, and it can make it quite hard. But obviously you do have those exceptions and really good days. But yeah, generally the red deer in pretty crappy weather, they sulk, especially wind. You'll find them, if it's coming, the wind's coming in easterly, you'll find them on the west side of the hill, get really tucked away, hiding away. So yeah, in terms of heat, obviously if it's going to be really hot, then that's going to shut the rutting activity down massively. Generally speaking, weather doesn't change the timing of the rut mate at all. That's sort of photo, like day length and photo period, as we've sort of discussed on previous podcasts. So I'd expect the rut to sort of be continuing similar times, whether it's a couple of days out. It's just the activity and the noise and the rutting that you're actually going to see impacted, if so, by weather. And yeah, so the big ones that you're going to notice is hot. They're going to definitely shut them down. If it's raining like excessively for the reds, you'll see them get shut down a little bit. Also, the wind will shut them down. But for the most part, fallow are pretty good. They're pretty tough, and they'll be out there. But yeah, if it is raining and just drizzling, I'd definitely be going out there after scrapes and doing some rattling, because often the bucks are all cruising, looking for that hot doe, and all going and touching up their scrapes. So it's a good time, to replicate a conflict where two bucks have rocked up on a scrape at the same time, and they having a bit of a barney. So I'd get out there, do a rattle, and hopefully a few bucks in the area come in. But thank you for sending your question in, Colin. Best of luck for the upcoming rut, and hopefully you get amongst a few bucks. When it comes to broadheads, Cayuga broadheads set the standard. Their full range is designed for every bow hunter, giving you unmatched accuracy and cutting power. The Pilot Cut is my personal favourite. It's engineered for smooth flight, deep penetration, and lethal performance, making it one of the best broadheads on the market. Go to their website today and use code TWIN10 to get 10% off your order. Don't leave your shot to chance. Upgrade to Cayuga broadheads and take your hunting to the next level.
So the next question has been sent in by Mark Bass. He says, "Hey guys, been a while but back again. I didn't get a buck last year, but I did get my first doe with the bow. My time off during the rut is going to be limited to either the 28th of March to the 4th of April or the 11th to the 18th of April. Which would you recommend? I was thinking March might be better for calling and rattling." So great question there. Thanks very much, Mark, and congratulations on the doe, mate. That's awesome. Hopefully you can take a buck, whatever age that may be, this upcoming rut, and just experience, that next level of success, I guess. As you've stated, I think the earlier dates would be better suited to targeting, any bucks or any males, especially if you're trying to, rattle and call off scrapes. That's just my opinion, but I do think that earlier in the rut, if the animals haven't been hunted for a long period of time, you have identified where, the scrapes are. If you can get in there, say, just below them in the dark, if it's, the thermals are still sucking down the hill, or just after, daylight, if by, say, 8, 9 a.m., the thermals are starting to go up the hill because that side of the ridge is getting a bit of sun to it. And you can get in there and, rattle with a good prevailing wind direction in your face. I would just be super, super patient, and something, whether it's a spike or a young buck, is going to walk by. I just think, if you can identify where there's plenty of rubs, a few good scrapes, all that type of stuff, pre-rut, the animals are just starting to get pretty excited, as are we. And I think that you're going to be in with a chance. I also think that pre-rut is a great time for people to target younger, males, purely because a lot of the time you don't have the complication of heaps of does on these same scrapes. Whereas, as the rut goes on, as these mature bucks and older bucks are starting to bring does to scrapes, and the does are coming in to check out all the action, and they're starting to get a bit more in season and fertile, and they want to be bred, more eyes on these scrapes and more eyes, in close proximity of the action just makes it a bit harder to hunt. But that's where, if there are a few does coming into season, then obviously a few subtle doe calls might work in areas where, these bucks are expecting to see does. So I think either way, those dates both sound pretty good. I think the April dates would probably be closer to peak rut in most areas in Australia. But those dates that you mentioned earlier, so the end of March, start of April, as you've sort of suggested, might be more ideal for calling and rattling. Again, this is going to be super, super, region specific. But again, if you're trying to target the peak, mature buck, then, pre-rut, middle of the rut or peak rut, and then post-rut, there's certain strategies that you can adopt. But if you do want to target a buck with calling, and it's just any buck, regardless of age, then I honestly think pre-rut is a really good time, just because, as I've said, they're usually on the move, checking out scrapes, they're rubbing a lot, they're sparring, they're reactive to, any signs of rut. So if they hear, especially when it's early in the rut and it's their first, rattles, maybe just a really light tinkling of antlers might be enough to even get like a bachelor group in. I've had mobs of fallow come in where the bucks are all sort of, they're still mates. They haven't even started fighting yet, but they just hear like a little bit of a clash of antlers, and you might have a couple of young bucks come in. Whereas sometimes, peak rut, you still rattle the antlers and they're like, nah, I don't want to fight. I don't even want to know who's up there. I'm just more curious in a doe call, or a doe little mew. So that's probably my way to, think about that question. But either way, I think with a well-called doe call or rattle, you're going to find some success on bucks, and hopefully you can take your first. Please keep us posted with how you go.
So this one got sent in by Greg Hogan. Thanks for that, mate. Hey guys, really enjoying the podcast. Quick question regarding Onyx Hunt and downloading the app itself on your phone. I've worked in the Yukon for the past 2 seasons, and the guys I hunt with use Onyx. What I found is the app was geographically restricted to US and Canada devices only, so it won't appear in the App Store, and even with a Canadian SIM card, they won't be able to share the app with me. I can log in and do everything on the web version on PC, just can't get the app. Curious how you guys got around that. Cheers, and looking forward to the next episode. Well, mate, I get around that because I'm a little bit of a sneaky bugger, and I've got mates in the US where it takes a little bit of an organising, but what I do is I log into their app store. I love the Onyx app. Obviously use it a lot. Already started scouting this year for a few hunts. I actually found out the other day that I got my first tag, which was a bit of an unexpected tag, which was an Idaho deer tag, which I'm super pumped for. So I've started looking on Onyx for that, and started doing a bit of e-scouting. I log into their app store and get them, which is quite a process. So firstly, obviously, you just need their username and password, but then they need to be sitting there as well, because they're going to get a confirmation text to say, hey, we've got someone trying to log in Australia. Is this correct? So then they've got to give you the code. Then in order to download the app, you've got to get another code now, we found out. And then there was another step, which I can't remember, but it was, the process was quite annoying, but it is doable. And then once it's on there, you've got it on your phone, and then it's really only just, continuously upgrading and, the app itself. So we've had no problems, had that the last 2 years now, and that's sort of how I've done it, just because I got so familiar with using it in the US, and because obviously, it's, in my opinion, the best mapping software on the market. We were coming back to Australia and using other products, which were pretty good, but they just weren't onX good. And so I just, had to develop and figure out a way to get around that. They used to have it in the App Store here, but they've now removed it in the Australian App Store. So that's how there's a few guys around that I know that also had it from back in the day, like, we're talking 7 years ago or so, 6-7 years ago, that still have it on their phones. But if you've missed the boat, you need to make some friends in the US and sneak into their App Store and download it. And then hopefully once you've got it on there, it's just a matter of, updating it. Sometimes if they have an update, you've got to go and re-log in and stuff. But for the most part, you can just ignore it and keep it on there. So that's how we get around that, Greg. Hopefully, one of the fellas in the Yukon will let you log in, and then you can get it on your phone down here. So thank you for sending that question in. Hopefully that helps explain a few other people why Ayden and I are still using onX whilst in Australia.
The next listener question has been sent in by Peter Tipple. I hope I've said that right. Apologies, Peter, if that's not how you say your last name. But he says, "Hey, Ayden, hope you guys had a great weekend. I've got a quick question. What's your go-to for carrying meat in your pack? I know in a game bag, but then what? Do you just put that in your pack? Don't the fluids get all over your other gear, or do you then put it in a plastic bag or something? If so, do you get worried about the meat being warm?" So great question, Peter, and thank you very much for sending that one in. It's honestly perfect time with, a lot of guys and gals intending to go out over the rut and hopefully get some antler and some bone and fill the freezer with meat. So James and I typically run the Agali game bags. We have those that are available in a large animal kit with about 5 bags each, and that fits, pretty much all of our Australian deer species in those 5 bags. Last year, we were successful on numerous red deer stags, which are quite big animals, and we were able to fit, all the quarters, neck meat, eye fillets, back straps, heart, basically every bit of meat that we wanted to consume in those game bags. So when it comes to butchering the kill and knowing that, we're going to intend to put all of it in a game bag, our strategy behind hanging the meat is basically as we start, most commonly, say it's a red stag, we've got him on the deck, we'll often start with one side of the animal. So whichever side that animal dies on, say the left-hand side of his body is upright, we'll start, by removing, say, the back leg. And then we'll get that back leg in a game bag without the hair, hanging, and by the time we then remove the back straps and the front legs and the neck meat on that whole same side and the tenderloins, a lot of that meat's been hanging for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever time it takes. It might take you an hour to do all that if you're by yourself and you're a bit slower. It might take you 20 minutes if you're really efficient at removing all the meat from that whole animal, and depends on species and how big it is, obviously. But we find that just by being able to do that and hang that meat as you go with these, little bits of paracord. We're not hanging it to get it away from predators or anything like that. We're purely hanging it so that it gets a bit of air around it and it starts drying out, and any blood that's in the meat starts dripping. But again, the more hygienic you are at butchering, the quicker you can remove hide, dirt, all that type of stuff from the meat, the cleaner your product's going to get. And to be honest, we don't really find that when we quarter an animal and hang it, that we have that much blood in the game bags. It doesn't seem to hold that much blood. Sure, there might be a little bit of pooling down the bottom afterwards, but that's just something that's soaked into the game bag. But otherwise, we find that by hanging it in a tree for, say, 10, 15 minutes, getting a little bit air dry, a lot of the meat sort of drains out of the meat. We then obviously run the Ebola stock packs. At the moment, James and I have been running the Vapor 5,000 packs with their mainframe. So The main frame, which you might have seen in some of our videos, is essentially a load frame outside of the pack. So the Vapor 5000 pack simply zips onto the frame. So when it comes to us basically putting one of those game bags, say we want to pack out depends how we're feeling, depends on the species. If it's a chiddle deer, we'll be able to chuck in both back legs, both front legs, basically pack out that whole animal in one trip, just purely from a weight standpoint. But when it comes to a red deer where the back legs are a lot larger, we might take both back straps and a back leg. And depending on how old and fit and, mobile each person is, say you can only take the neck meat and back straps out, and then you come back and you take a back leg. We basically get that main frame and the pack separated, zipped open so it's one side, chuck that slab of meat, whatever it is, against the main frame, simply re-strap the Vapor 5000 pack over the meat. So it's not actually putting that meat within the backpack. So all of our gear, whether it's camera gear, callers, water, meals, jumpers, cold weather gear, whatever it may be that's in our pack, stays in our pack. And that meat is basically on the outside sitting against a load frame. And that still maintains really, really good ventilation. It's actually a lot easier for carrying because you've got it confined and sort of strapped onto a structure that doesn't really... I know that in the old days, I used to chuck meat in my pack and then the bag would sag, and rather than carrying the meat, properly and vertically along your back, you'd basically be carrying this meat that's just hanging off your frame, and it's really difficult to sort of walk uphill, and you can't strap it down and fix it to your backpack tight enough. So that's just what the method that we've gone to. And again, because of the packs and everything in the process that we do, we just find that the best. But as you've mentioned in your question, for a cleaner pack without any blood or fluid, then what you can definitely do, say you got to put the meat in a game bag, hang it, and then you're still finding that you have to chuck your game bag with meat in your pack, then what I would do is get a really heavy duty garbage bag, put that over the game bag, and then chuck it in your pack. And as soon as you get that pack, say it takes you an hour to pack it out of the deepest, darkest little hellhole, and you get that meat back to your car or whatever, I would strip that garbage bag off as soon as you can get it out of your backpack, rehang the game bag in a nice aerated shady spot, even if you can't put it in the fridge or an esky or anything like that. Because even if you have ice and water and stuff in an esky, it's honestly better, in my opinion, to hang that meat in a dry, shady, say above a creek in a spot that's getting plenty of ventilation and a bit of airflow. And what you'll find is that game bag, yes, it might have sweated a little bit whilst being in your garbage bag in your pack, but as soon as you get that garbage bag off and you can allow it to breathe, the game bags, especially if you go and invest in some good ones like the Agali game bags, are just going to allow that meat to air dry really, really well. And once it gets a bit of a crust and that sort of drier rind on it, it cools down really, really nicely. Then you obviously go back, get all the meat out, do all your trips. And once you've got it all hanging, all, out of garbage bags, ideally hanging nice, dry and ventilated, if you're in the bush for a bit more time, then what I would do, and if you've got the ability to hang it without chucking it in like an esky, is maybe go and even debone it so that that meat is away from any areas, especially like the ball joint on the back legs. Like if you can go and remove, the femur from that back leg and get all the meat separated into different cuts and hanging, in little game bags or something like that, or even chuck them in an esky once they're air dried, you're just going to have a lot better meat product when you take it home to the family. The same thing goes, say you do have ice in an esky or a Yeti and you chuck all that meat in there, that's all fine as long as it's really, really cold. But what I would do is, you notice that often if you leave it overnight or if you chuck warm meat into an esky or a Yeti, even though it's got ice, that ice melts fairly quickly. So what I would do is just drain it as readily as possible. Like as soon as you see any of that sort of bloody tinged water accumulating down the bottom of the esky or the Yeti, then just make sure you drain it, because that's what's going to be holding, all of those bacteria. Blood has bacteria, and that's just what's going to be contributing to hot, sweaty, humid meat. So basically with meat care, we're aiming for dry and cool. So hopefully those questions are answered and that little tip sort of helps you out. But definitely investing in good quality gear and then having a really strong process as to, all right, an animal's on the deck. How do I go about getting this meat removed from the hot, now, dead carcass, hanging in a tree, taken in my backpack back to camp, cooling back at camp, and then out of the bush back home is really, really important. But if you need any follow-up questions, then please feel free to shoot those through. Thanks very much, Peter, and good luck this rut. Irongate Knives are an Australian-owned and operated small business. They specialise in quality handmade knives. Whether it's a hunting knife, filleting knife, cleaver, or custom creation, get in touch with the team today and they will take care of you. Sign up to their email list for up-to-date news relating to their weekly knife drops. It's a first-in, first-served system, so be quick. We have just got our hands on a few knives from their range and they are super impressive. They make epic gifts for a friend or loved one and will last generations. It's not often that you can say that a tool will outlast its owner, but that's a fact when talking about quality blades. Check out Irongate Knives today by visiting irongateknives.com.
So this next one's been sent in from Dales Outdoors. Hey guys, is it common to see fallow deer bachelor mobs staying in their rutting grounds? A property I have access to in the Hunter Valley has a productive rut and activity went quiet early May. Now I have just started to see mobs of bucks on the same property in late June. Any input would be great. Thanks. So yeah, there's two things that can happen, sort of going off the back of the previous question I answered earlier. So you can get, I've had both scenarios. So you can get bucks that, looking at the life cycle of or going through the year, I guess, and this buck's life cycle, you can have periods where a buck will grow its velvet out on a place, literally rub its, velvet off and walk, 500 meters, start making scrapes, ruts there, stays there post-rut, and you're hunting the same bucks all year round. So I've had that on places for sure. Generally speaking, they're places where the feed's pretty good, but not restricted to that. And yeah, I've seen the same bucks and I've hunted the same bucks all year round. Other circumstances that I've also had is when you've got, bucks that will grow out there. And this is just from my observations and obviously filming deer and stuff helps. And it wasn't a very big, there wasn't high numbers of deer. So it was pretty easy to work out what bucks were what, especially in that higher end of maturity. But yeah, so with trial cameras and filming, I was able to work out that I had bucks that were growing out there during, sort of October, November, December, Jan, Feb, that would then rub out and then they would leave. And then new bucks would come in March, April. And then May was a bit of a mix-up. And then the same bucks would come back sort of June, July, August to then grow up their velvet again. So essentially you had this switch up, which... so you had bucks growing out there and then bucks moving off to rut somewhere else and then new bucks coming in to rut in that same location, if that makes sense. So they just did a bit of a switch. And then the bucks would come back and grow their velvet out there, bachelor up after the rut again. So you can also get the other two options, which is what Toby was saying earlier, which is obviously then when you have no deer, no bucks on your place for most of the year and then they rock up for just the rut. Or you can have the other option where you don't get a rut, sadly, like Toby, and then all of a sudden you've got bucks for, growing out their velvet and post-rut period. So those are sort of the four options. But yeah, so to answer your question, I realize it doesn't help, but more probably educational. But yeah, so you can have this scenario where the same bucks hang around with all year, or you get a mix-up just before the rut and then they leave, and then the old fellas come back in and hang around bachelor mob and grow their velvet. So... yeah. The fact that you got deer, though, that's the main one, that you can hunt all year round, which is great.
The next question has been sent in by Sebastian from Vandelay Industries. I believe this was sent in through Facebook. So thank you very much, Sebastian. He says, "Hi guys, I've been enjoying the podcast. Keep up the good work. I rifle hunt for fallow. What is the best way to hunt fallow deer during the day? He's got not early morning or late afternoon outside of the rut. Is hunting the middle of the day the most likely way to find them bedded? Thanks, Sebastian." So really good question. And this question, honestly, I think we try to answer it to a degree when we did a podcast last year when we first kicked off the Twin Elements podcast, and James and I jumped into a few strategies to implement when the fallow deer or red deer just aren't calling and we're experiencing what we call a, I guess, silent or quiet rut or, raw behavior or period. So what we like to do is, to be honest, this sort of, whilst it's not ideal, this is how we hunt a lot of other species. And one of the biggest things I would say is purely just be out there on the mountain or on the hill or on the flats, wherever you're hunting here in Australia for fallow deer. I would just say, if you can get to a spot where you know deer are in the area, say you did hear them in the morning and they were rutting on a ridge and that action went quiet, but you can't seem to find them. If it's for fallow deer, then a lot of the time those bucks are actually going to be on the scrape bedded. And the does, might be down in the gully a little bit further away. So the sort of middle of the day can actually be a pretty good time, because often the prevailing wind is most consistent during the middle of the day towards the early afternoon. And then also the thermals are most consistent. So say that buck's, on his scrape 3/4 away up a ridge, and you can get a good breeze in your face, and knowing that those thermals are sucking up the mountain, what I would do is get the wind in my face and come in from the top of the ridge, do a big circle around the top of the ridge, down to where you think that scrape might be. And again, you don't need to know exactly where it is with a coordinate as to where that scrape is. But if you know that there's some good game trails on that ridge leading towards it, and you just go one step at a time, almost how I used to hunt sambar deer in Victoria, and basically just go one step glass, one step glass, one step glass, and you do that for hours at a time, it can be a really, really effective way of finding animals. When they're least expecting it, they're not moving, so you're theoretically the only one, there's no rush. There's no, I've spotted a fallow buck and he's moving over the ridge and away out of my life. It's if you spot that animal, they are in a super susceptible stalking position, because in theory, they aren't doing anything for the next 40 minutes, hour, 2 hours, as long as they're bedded. Sure, they might get up and rebed, but you just watch them and there's no rush. So basically, if you can be super quiet, again, what helps there is just walking on a game trail at the right height on a ridge. Having the wind in your face means you're not going to get smelt, and then moving slowly decreases the likelihood that you're going to get spotted. Then you've got really good circumstances to potentially find an animal bedded when they're not expecting, to be hunted or to have the threat around. Because sometimes in the morning, especially if animals aren't croaking, like fallow bucks, for example, and you've got 20 hinds around or 20 does around that stag or buck, it can be really, really difficult to close the gap. Whereas if you've got come in from the top, you've got good elevation. Often it's similar when I hunt chittle deer. You'll spot a stag's antlers or a buck's antlers before you see the doe's heads as you come in over a bit of a crest. Say it's the basalt wall for chittle deer, or the grass cover, for example, comes up to 20 inches above the ground. A hind, if she's bedded, is going to be lower than that point. So you might not see her head, but if you're glassing really, really well, you might see that stag flick his antlers and you're like, oh, okay, there's a stag there. As you get closer, you might unveil that there's actually 20, chittle hinds with him. And in this instance for you, you might see hopefully the buck's antlers first on his scrape. And then just below him, as you get closer, you might realize, oh shit, there's actually 10 does just below him. And then there's a satellite buck. And then there's a satellite buck there and a spiker here. But if you're hunting with a rifle, then your range increases too. And all you've got to do is set up, again, with the prevailing wind in your face, in a shootable spot, get a really good rest. I wouldn't be rushing. I wouldn't be calling. And that buck, as long as the wind's consistent and the thermals are coming uphill, at some point he's going to stand up and present a shot. He's probably going to go and check one of the does. So, that's how I would personally approach it. If you don't want to be that, I guess, active and actually move onto their side of the ridge in the event that you don't really want to scent up areas and you want to be played a bit more safe, what I would do is just get up as high as you can on a good elevated glassing knob and basically just glass. Animals, more than you think, get up during the middle of the day. We've had some really good buck hunts during the middle of the day where just at 11 till 2, they'll start croaking and give up their spot. And a lot of other hunters are back at camp having a sleep or having a couple of beers during the middle of the day. And, a lot of people say, yeah, they were just croaking at night or early in the morning and they just shut up so quickly. But a lot of hunters aren't out there during the middle of the day to hear them. And then it's sort of like that saying, if a tree falls in the woods, do you hear it? Blah, blah, blah. I think I probably butchered that But yes, bucks will get up and croak during the middle of the day. And the only way you're going to find that out is if they're calling and if you're on the hill to either see them or hear them. So again, there's some strategies that I would probably implement. Again, anytime it comes to middle of the day hunting, I am trying to do it the least intrusive as possible, and always keeping in mind that, wind is going to be a massive thing. If the wind's even half finicky, I won't even risk it. I'll just get up on a glassing knob and wait till the afternoon when generally the thermals are going to start sucking downhill and you're going to have a bit better breeze, and those animals are going to start moving, hopefully vocalizing and making it a bit easier to find them. But best of luck for this upcoming rut, and please send us through any more questions if we haven't answered that one to its full extent. Cheers.
So the next one comes in from Ethan Henkel. So in the post-rut, I seem to have a mixed bag of bachelor mobs, solo bucks, and bucks on the back of does. I experienced this at a new property. Is this typical or bad buck to doe ratio? No, so what happens, and like we've previously I think we discussed it in our fallow deer sort of biological rut guide. I can't remember which one that was, but you obviously have the rut, which is the main period in which the does come on. And so when they're all cycling and stuff, everything's going to be rutting. So you have 100% of the bucks generally with 100% of the does rutting. And what happens is as those does get bred, so just say you make it to May and 95% of those does have been bred, but 5% of those does that didn't get bred in sort of March, April and into early May, they still may come on and cycle. So that's when, you hear guys with big fallow deer numbers and stuff where, you hear rutting when I say rutting, I mean like croaking in, May, even into late June. And so that can happen generally because you might have like a yearling fawn that was born late and she hasn't grown out and started cycling when she should have sort of earlier in the year. And so she's had nutritionally, she may have been delayed because just say her mum got shot by a hunter or something like that. And so she was set back when she was like a little weaner. And then she has then, fallen behind. And so she's a bit late. Equally, you could have, you might have a doe that had twins, for example, that was nutritionally held back because she was rearing two fawns. She wasn't in the best condition. Generally speaking, though, the older girls get into condition really quickly and stuff. So it'd have to be a really bad circumstance. Like it'd have to be pretty bad drought where you are to have sort of older does. But I mean, it certainly happened like in like the 2018, 2019, 2020 droughts. There would have definitely been like a really spread out rut. But so yeah, in this post rut period, the older bucks, generally they know that the main rut, and same with red stags, they know that the main rut period's over and they're fattening up. Don't get me wrong, if a hot doe walks past a bachelor mob of bucks that are all fattening up, they'll go and be right up a clacker and try and mount her and breed. But for the most part, it's the younger bucks that are actually still running around and just trying to see what's coming into season. So that's when you see a lot of that like 2.5, like spikers, 2.5-year-old, maybe even 3.5-year-old bucks that are, they're still touching up the trees. They're still making scrapes and stuff like that. Sometimes you go in there in June and you almost feel like there's more activity and rubs and scrapes and stuff going on then. And there's almost, people talk about this like second rut period. And often that's, just the young fellas running around and the late does and yearlings coming on. You can certainly pick up some rutting activity, especially in high deer numbers in May and June. But for the most part, a lot of the older mature bucks are probably going to be just fattening up. They know that the main period's over, but like anything, they could be there rutting as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Ethan. And sounds like you've got a good property there, mate. Hopefully you can get amongst a few fallow deer. Have you ever tried applying for tags in the States? then you already know the pain. Different states, different draw systems, deadlines all over the place, point schemes that don't make no sense, and half the websites don't even like international credit cards or our addresses. Which is why Ayden and I rely on Huntin' Full. These guys live and breathe the US draw system. They break down every state, every species, every tag option, and lay it out so hunters can finally make sense of it. Whether you're chasing elk in Colorado, mule deer in Wyoming, or whitetails back east, they'll tell you where to apply, what your real odds are, and how to build points without wasting time or money. Additionally, they create a hunt strategy that infinitely increases your chance of success. Our success in the US would be nothing like it is without the help of the Huntin' Full team. So if you're looking to turn that bucket list US hunt into a real plan, then join Huntin' Full. Use code TWINELEMENTS when you sign up to get 25% off your first year's Huntin' Full application fees. Let the Huntin' Full team guide you through the chaos.
The next question is actually a question that we get a ton, and this one has been sent in by Lazy Fox Outdoors on Instagram. So thank you very much for sending that through. Do fallow deer have a second rut? If so, when does it usually kick off? So this is a bit of a topic or subject that we get a heap. We get a lot of people saying, oh, the rut's really slow. And then I notice, a month later that there was a second rut and, it's all the does that have been missed and this and that. And to be honest, there's a lot of information on this, especially with people that breed fallow deer or breed whitetail deer or breed, and I know you're saying whitetail deer, why are you talking about whitetail deer? But deer biology is pretty similar across the species. So when it comes to fallow deer, when we talk about the rut, that is a decrease in the photo period. So daylight shortening, shorter day length is what signals those does to breed. So that is the main driving force. That is going to trigger for, X amount percentage, say it's 70%, 80%, 90%, ideally 100% of the does, if every other factor, say weather, nutrition, body condition score, buck to doe ratio, population dynamics, carrying capacity, illness, sickness, all these other factors that have tiny, tiny variance on fallow deer and their physiology and biology, those little factors are pretty much irrelevant when it comes to day length. So shortening of day length coincides with fallow and red deer in particular to have their rut pretty much in March, April every year. So that's why when we say the rut is on, it's going to happen regardless of if we, say as hunters, oh, it's really hot this time of year, or this year it sounded like a quieter rut. I don't think they really had a rut. Those animals are going to rut regardless, and it's all coinciding with a shortening of day length. So if we say, just for argument's sake, in Australia, that is on the 7th to 14th of April every year. I understand that some people are going to say, no, it's earlier, it's later, blah, blah, blah. Let's just, for argument's sake today, say that the fallow deer rut is on the 7th to 14th of April for 2026. If there is what people call a second rut, normally that is the young does or does that have been, missed or not bred in that primary rut coming into season, normally 21 days after that period, roughly, give or take, because all does are going to be in their own different little cycles. But if we assume, similar to, other deer species, cattle, whatever it may be, buffalo, that most of these larger mammals have a estrus cycle of 21 days. So that's when they basically produce a follicle, release an egg, all these types of things. And they do that to basically what we call come in heat. And then when they're most fertile is at the end of that cycle. And basically that's when they're showing their estrus behavior. And that's what a buck is going and seeking out. They'll smell it in their urine. They smell the hormones saying that, yep, she's released an egg. I need to breed her now for optimum chance of producing offspring. What we often see as hunters, again, as a second rut, keeping in mind that, again, they've studied this in deer farms, all this type of stuff. Nature is very, very good at, being fertile. Fallow deer, fallow does, if many of the factors are sort of just, let's just say normal, it's somewhere like 80% of does will get bred in the first rut period, so April 7th to 14th, and 80% of those will be pregnant and not need a secondary service. say of those, all those does, that 20% come back in season in 21 days because they've released an egg. For whatever reason, the egg wasn't, fertilized by a male's sperm, then that could be because, one, that doe may have not even cycled. So she may have been in really, really poor body condition. Taking it back to, if an animal is too skinny or sick or something like that to release an egg, she might need an extra couple of days of nutrition, blah, 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 to get into season. And then thus, that's what hunters are often saying, I can hear a buck croaking in May. I think they're having a second rut. And a buck might croak in May for one young female that's come into season, because some of these young does might actually basically hit an age where they're now physiologically ready for pregnancy. So they might cycle outside of the rut. And that's most commonly seen in either older females that are in poorer body conditions, say they had a big wiener on them and maybe gave birth, later in the year compared to all of their, females in the population, or a really young female that wasn't quite old enough and mature enough to breed at the peak rut. And then as the year's gone on, they've put a bit more condition on, they've come into season, and that's normally what you see as delayed. And those animals will often have their fawns later, again, giving the fact that fallow deer normally have about 7 months gestation. So most of the does, as we said, for them, want to have one rut, get bred all at the same time, so they have fawns 7 months later at the same time. They avoid predation as a big group of, fawns hitting the ground at the same time, and then they all wean them at the same time and all get in season the same time. So again, great question from Lazy Fox Outdoors. Hopefully that gives you guys a bit of an explanation around that. So they don't typically have a fallow deer rut, would be the answer for, in short. They have a primary rut, and then if there are any animals that physiologically weren't ready, or there are any animals that weren't bred or had a, conception and then early embryonic loss or something like that, then there may be instances where individual animals have a estrus period where we may see rutting activity afterwards, but there is not necessarily a second rut. Like there is no defined, okay, everyone's going to get pregnant now in the primary rut, and then we've got a scheduled second rut. Again, it may be individuals coming into season after the ideal time, but that is pretty much an abnormality or an anomaly when it comes to nature, especially when considering that these animals are super, super efficient. And most of those does, as we said, like 80% of them are getting bred and having their offspring, in the first rut period, which is normally what we call the peak rut. So hopefully that, makes everything make a bit more sense. It's something that, I think once you sort of wrap your head around it a little bit more, coinciding with the rut being based around daylight hours and shortening a day length and all that type of stuff. And then when the does get bred, they're going to have 7 months gestation. All the fawns want to be born, come December, when, just after spring, all the good food's around, they have less predators trying to pick off one individual fawn. It all starts making a lot more sense. And then that also then allows the does to wean those fawns at a certain time, normally just before the rut, and then start getting pregnant for the next batch of fawns to drop. So great question. Definitely drives a little bit of conversation there. So hopefully that helps everyone out.
So I haven't got a name for this one, sadly. I've just got the question, but any tips on where to find fallow deer scrapes? So with fallow deer scrapes, the bucks, the does obviously go to the bucks, but typically the bucks sort of set up in, they're very chauvinistic animals. So the bucks are going to set up in areas where they can like really project out. And so like a lot of the hunting, where the fallow deer are typically up and down like the east coast, which is going to be in the mountains. Like there's definitely fallow deer, in central Queensland and stuff like that, where it's just like pretty well dead flat. But for the most part, it's like what a fallow deer wants to do, like their predominant scrape that I'm thinking like, okay, where am I going to drop a pin and find a fallow deer scrape? So it'd generally be 3/4 of the way up, sort of on a bit of a bench or like a sort of a bowl where it goes out into the valley. So like a good spot would be if you imagine like the main gully system, if it went up and then the gully sort of split into a Y, and then in between that Y, there's obviously like the valley keeps going up, and then there's a bench on that middle between the Y, like 3/4 of the way up or halfway up, and there's a bench there where they can like project and croak down into the valley. So somewhere like that, or anywhere they can just sort of project out. Generally, they want to be in spots too that are pretty close to the doe's natural movements and behaviors. So they know, this is where Stacey and Cindy and Lucy and whoever else go down, and they get a feed down in the creek or down on a crop or whatever, or improved pasture, and then they're going to travel up through this corridor here, and then they're going to bed up in these thick little bushes here. So they know where the does are going to be moving, and they want to set up on those travel routes and travel corridors. So generally you'll find that the bucks, they don't just stay up on the top of the hill. Like unless there's really high numbers, I should say, so if there's really good numbers, a buck may just stay, because obviously the does go to the buck. So if there's really good numbers, a buck may just stay at the top of the hill and croak his ass off and just sit on a scrape. But for the most part, if the numbers are sort of lower to moderate, he may move with the does. So when it's like feeding time, he'll almost create like a harem where he'll go down and they'll be feeding in improved pasture, and he'll be croaking down there. Then as they transition up the hill, he'll transition with them, and he may be croaking along the way, and different scrapes and stuff. And then you hear the phrase like rub lines and stuff like that, where you'll see where, and most of the time it's like a pretty clear, because fallow deer obviously like excavate and destroy all the saplings within sight on good block. So you'll see where they've rubbed, one tree, scrape, and then it's another tree, scrape. And then, because that's the thing, like as the rut goes on, they're traveling these travel corridors, especially when they're setting up these scrape lines and stuff. So travel corridors are really good, and I find that sort of 3/4 of the way up a ridge on that game trail that I generally sort of walk most of the time when I'm hunting, the bucks are going to be walking that height and that level too, because it's just the easiest level to sort of contour your way around the mountains with. Once you're at that elevation, you can cover a lot of country, but it's not necessarily difficult. Whereas if you're dropping down and going up and down into the valley floor and up the other side, not to say they don't do that, but it just takes a lot more energy. It's a lot more strenuous. So it is a lot easier just sort of like making your way around the rim almost. And then especially, croaking out from there, projecting yourself out, hopefully get the does to come to you. So, just think, like to answer the question, just think fallow bucks are chauvinistic. If I was a deer, where could I stand and scream at the top of my lungs and get the best projection? And that's sort of the place that you want to be looking. And then the second thing I'd be thinking about is, okay, well, where do I know that the deer already feed, travel through, and bed? And then those are the places that I'd also be looking. And normally you find those crossover points, and that's where you'll find where the scrapes are going to be at. So hopefully that answers your question, mate. And best of luck finding a few scrapes and getting amongst the action this rut.
Ever dreamed about hunting chital deer? Well, you need to know about spotted safaris. Embark on an unforgettable journey with our fully guided chital deer hunts, catering to both rifle and bow hunters. Spotted Safaris is conducted in the heart of the Basalt Wall region, North Queensland, Australia. We specialise in catering to all experience and fitness levels of our clients, providing trophy chital stag hunts as well as beginner-focused adventures and meat hunts. With over 15 years' experience bow hunting chital deer, our guides know these animals and the grounds they hunt like the back of their hands. With opportunities to also hunt infamous basalt boars, experience spectacular wildlife viewing and stunning scenery whilst on tour, there really is something for everyone at Spotted Safaris. Inquire today by emailing spottedsafaris@hotmail.com or simply jump online, find them on Instagram or Facebook and send them a DM to start the conversation today. A dream chital stag hunt is closer than you might think. Alrighty, so our last question has been sent in by Merman. So, righto, here's one for you lads. I got close to a croaking buck last rut. Croaking back at him, fired him up. We were going back and forth, yet he wouldn't budge from where he was. I tried to crest the hill a little to see where he was and eventuate the situation, but that's right when the wind switched and ruined it. Was there anything I could have done to make him leave his girls, besides croaking and doe calling? Would the rattle have tipped him over the edge, you reckon? Also called in a couple of bucks they wouldn't break the 40 to 55 yard mark. One possibly saw my movement, but I know the others definitely didn't. Is it just too early in the rut where they do that type of thing, or is it just the luck of the draw? So thanks very much, firstly, for the question, Merman. In the first part of your question or submission, you mentioned croaking at the buck and him not budging from where he was croaking from. And that's perfect. Like, that's actually very, very normal. And that, to be honest, matches their biology and what fallow sort of do, if that makes sense. So because a fallow buck typically croak, it's not actually to croak at other bucks. It's not really like red stags, for example, will roar at each other, and that's a male generally saying to another male, do not come over here, I'm going to bash you. Whereas with fallow deer, their biology is they croak to try and attract does to their presence. So I'm sure them croaking and strutting on a scrape, gives a certain perspective to other bucks, like, oh shit, I better not go up there, that's his territory. But it's not, his goal isn't actually to attract or call other bucks to his scrape. He's basically calling to say, hey ladies, I'm your man, come up here, I'm going to breed you. So, that's very much based around fallow bucks and scrapes being territorial. They want to bring girls to their scrape, to their location. Whereas, as I said, red deer are mobile sort of creatures. They will walk a ridgeline calling to other males saying, don't come up here, this is my whole ridgeline. And that's basically all based on their different, biology. So all that to say that, in my opinion, when you were croaking to that buck, you were basically another buck saying that, you stay over there, I'll stay over here. You have your spot on the ridge, I'll have my spot on the ridge. Let's keep it that way. We're both happy. We've both potentially got does. That's sort of my interpretation of why I think that buck wouldn't budge. If you let out a doe call, it might have been a different scenario. Like, he might have gone, oh, there's a doe over there. And if he doesn't have does, he might go there. But the fact that you're just two mates, it's almost like shit analogy incoming for you guys that listen and know that I love an analogy. It's like two blokes on a Sunday morning starting up their lawnmowers and just saying, oh, hey, Roger, how you going? Have a good day, mate. Yep, cool. You're mowing your lawn, I'm mowing my lawn. Sweet, have a good day. That's basically what you're saying there. Whereas you cranking up your lawnmower to the missus is like, holy shit, Merman's cranking up the lawnmower. He's such a good husband. He's doing all the right things. That turns me on. Whereas to your mate across the road, he's like, oh, yep, you're mowing your lawn, I'm mowing my lawn. Cool, you mow your lawn, I'll mow my lawn. That's about the extent of it. So in that scenario, what I would have personally done, rather than call at him, if that buck is calling, as you've said, and he's croaking pretty well, and I'm assuming it's probably early morning or, in the afternoon or whatever, I would have actually done a really big loop, got the wind right from whatever direction it was coming, and then I would have also considered the thermals. So if it's early in the morning, I'd come in from below. If it's, mid-morning and the thermals might be a bit switchy, I'd get the wind in my face and I'd probably come in level with him on the ridge or the mountain. And then if it's, later in the day, say mid-morning and the thermals are going up, I'd get the wind in my face and then come in from above, dropping down onto him. So having done all of that, trying to get the wind right and thermals right as best as possible, what I would do if that buck's croaking continuously, I would basically just shut my lips, not talk to him at all. Like, why introduce the thought that he's now going to be, careful of some incoming, other deer basically, or hunter, telling, him that, hey, I'm coming in, I'm now at 100, I'm at 80, I'm at 70, where are you? I would basically shut right up, let him croak continuously, especially if he's doing it on his own, say every minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever that interval is. That should be enough for you to go, okay, yep, he's in front of me 300 meters away. You use the next 5 minutes between when he croaks next to cut the distance, looking out for hinds, satellites, obviously him, obviously his scrape. But say you've now cut the distance 150 meters over that 5 minutes and haven't heard a croak, and then he croaks, and then he's now 150 meters in front of you. You're like, perfect, he's still in the same spot. In theory, he's still on his scrape. I only have to go, if I'm hunting with a rifle, say another 50 meters to get a nice ethical shot on him if I can lay eyes on him and have a good background, whatever it may be. So that's sort of my interpretation and my thoughts in that scenario. He's likely just sitting on a scrape that he's built trying to get the girls to come into him. So if he's calling and telling you where he is, again, even if it's 10 minutes, half an hour, and you can get a rough idea of where he is, I'd much rather that than, as I said, letting him know where you are. And the biggest thing is, even if you find that, 10 minutes has gone by, he's not doing anything, and if you let out a croak, he croaks back, I'd definitely do that. Just to get that, oh, yep, he is still there. He's about 150 meters below me, particularly if the vegetation's thick or whatever. But what I would really be doing is watching out for the girls as you approach, because the more you vocalize, the more chance there is of those girls that are likely going to be around him, around his scrape if he's a dominant buck. You're basically going to be alerting those girls that someone else is coming to the area. They're not as ruddy as the bucks. They're going up there to be bred, but most importantly, they're going up there to survive and make sure that, they're around for the longevity and the future. So again, I would basically be using him being distracted by the rut and shouting sort of exactly where he is to close the gap slowly over X amount of time. If he's just calling every 20 seconds, then you can obviously beeline in there pretty quick. Once you've got a visualization, hopefully he's got no girls, because then that makes it even easier. You might even be able to slip into range and just hit him with a doe call. And if he's got no girls there, he might run straight in being like, oh shit, there's finally a girl coming. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if he's got 20 girls, again, I wouldn't make a single noise. I would basically just be dead quiet, sneaking in as close as you can get. If you can get a shot doing that method, then great. If, say, for example, you get in to 50 meters, you don't quite have a shot, and that buck's really, really active on his scrape, he's croaking, because often they'll croak at the does, as we said earlier. But if there's a satellite buck that keeps coming in trying to steal his does, he's going to keep croaking, saying, no, girls, stay with me, stay with me, stay with me. So yes, the presence of other bucks will get them to croak more, but they're not calling to the bucks as such. They're more calling to the girls, saying, no, stay with me, stay with me. And just by doing that, I would be waiting for one of those bucks to slip in too close. That buck that you're trying to shoot, the dominant buck, race off the scrape, and then you might be able to sneak in 5 meters, 10 meters closer while all the girls and bucks run down the hill 20 meters. And then as they come back up to the scrape, because that's where they're going to want to rut and be bred, and the buck's going to want to breed his does and keep his does, you might now be at 45 or 40 with the shot. And that's just how this little intricate game of cat and mouse generally goes, especially for bow hunting, when you do have to do it a lot closer. But yeah, that's all sort of my thoughts. And to be honest, I think that's a great question to end today's podcast on, purely because I think we as hunters, associate the rut as this time when there's, increased calling. There's a lot more action, rutting behavior. It's, after all, it is called the rut. But sometimes we just need to, I think, calm ourselves a little bit and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? We want to know where an animal is and basically then be able to go and hunt them. So sometimes if they're calling on their own accord, that's it. Like, our job's half done. Like, we now know there's an animal on that ridge, if it's a fallow buck in that location. That's, for most of us should be, okay, cool. Now what's the wind doing? How's my best approach? Are there does there? Are there not? Are there satellites there? Are there not? Will that buck stay on the scrape? Will he come into a doe call? These are all questions that you should be asking as you're getting more and more information. But if they're calling, letting you know where they are, then you've basically got the script started, and then you can hopefully just write, each of the chapters on your way to filling that story and filling, a buck on the ground. So great question. Thank you very much, Merman. we certainly appreciate it. I have personally used Hoyt bows for over 20 years now. Building the most innovative and technological advanced gear, their carbon bows are the lightest, leanest, and most compact on the market. Quite frankly, I treat mine like hell, throwing them around, banging them on rocks and scrub whilst on the hunt. Time and time again, it has performed when I've needed it most. I'm currently running the Carbon RX9 with 80-pound limbs. Even at that weight, it's easy to draw and throw absolute darts. This past year, I've been shooting the best I've ever shot, and a lot of that comes from my confidence in Hoyt. Get serious, get Hoyt. Head to their website to check them out today, or for our Australian listeners, head in store to Venture Hunting and Outdoors. The team not only stock Hoyt, but also have tons of other important archery equipment hanging from their walls. Mention Twin Elements and they will look after you. Alrighty, everyone, that wraps up today's podcast. As you are hearing this, if you're listening right as this podcast drops, then you will have the opportunity to join James and I this coming weekend at the Venture Hunting and Outdoors event. James and I are attending and running a Bow Hunting the Rut event. It's basically a mimic of what we did last year and had massive success with the Rut Ready event. It turns out that last year was a great turnout. We had heaps of Australian hunters and outdoorsmen representing the community. And this year we are basically heading down there on the 29th of January. We will be airing our 2025 Bow Hunting the Rut cinematic film. So it's a short film highlight version of the 2025 red deer and fallow deer rut for us, and has some intense, incredible footage, you name it. We've got roaring red deer stags, croaking fallow bucks, and some spectacular wildlife and scenery that you have all come to expect from us and the productions that we do here at Twin Elements. So as I said, we will be doing this screening the night of Thursday, 29th of January, in the evening. I think it kicks off from about 6 p.m. just after close of normal business hours. After that, we will be doing a live question and answer discussion where James and I give you guys, real world advice and tips and tactics on how we would tackle your specific hunting questions or scenarios. So as always with these sort of events, numbers are limited. There are 150 spaces available. And I believe even by the time this podcast launches, that may very well be done and dusted. So please head to the Venture Hunting website, look up the Bow Hunting the Rut event, and secure your spot today by registering again at Venture Hunting and Outdoors. Following this event, James and I will be launching the full Bow Hunting the Rut series on our YouTube channel. So if you can't, make it to the Venture event on the 29th of January, then please don't worry, do not stress. You will not be missing out. We will be kicking off the series with this very same cinematic film on the 11th of February, 2026. And that's going to be an epic 9-part series, Bow Hunting the Rut. As I said, we're hunting red deer stags. I managed to take my personal best at the time, and then a couple of days later or weeks later I take an even better, more mature red deer stag, and James gets in there with the action, taking some boars, billies. Dad even comes along for one of the episodes. So please make sure that you all continue to like, comment and subscribe to our Twin Elements YouTube channel. We are trying to get to 25k subs in the next month or two, and we honestly think that with this new influx of cinematic pieces that it is well on the way to becoming a reality. Next, please check out our website. We have stories over there. We've got vlogs, recipes with food, throwing it way back to the Hungry Hunter days. There are photos from all of our hunts and adventures. Plus, we have put in a mountain of work to get up over 40 epic prints for sale on the website. There's some stunning shots of wildlife, scenery, and moments from the wild. So please check those out. They directly support James and I here at Twin Elements and make what we do more affordable, as well as more realistic. Obviously, with some of these hunts and things that we do costing a lot of money for airfares, all of that, sales directly go back into allowing us to do these endeavors. Lastly, Please continue to subscribe, review, and rate this podcast. If you have any topics that you want discussed, please email them through to us at info@twinelements.com.au, or simply want to get in touch with us, ask us a question, please send us a message to our socials. We will get back to you on there. Thank you, legends. We will see you next week on the Twin Elements podcast. Take care.